At 55, I came to the realization that life's simply too short. Insert here in the lines below, but ultimately, it's too short for what? Life's too short to spend time doing things that are pointless, inconsequential, things that don't have positive impact in your life. And the reality is, it wasn't 55. I didn't hit a light switch and all of a sudden I was thinking that, you know what, I have to make this big change in my life at 55 is where it happened. This is happening, and it's been happening for some time. Since essentially probably in the late 40s, early 50s, I started to come to a realization that life's simply too short and it's time to make some changes. Have you ever had time in your life where you've gone through and you're wondering, why am I doing this? You know, you jump out of a plane and doing this little skydiving exercise and you're thinking, why am I doing this? Well, there was probably a realization that said life's too short. Right, life is too short to not enjoy living. And see, that's why sometimes when you look around and people do things that you question, why would you do that? Skydiving, all of a sudden taking race car lessons later in life, all of a sudden taking on some new arts and new crafts, maybe taking dancing lessons and, start traveling. All of a sudden you see that person you work with, that person, maybe a friend, a family member. All of a sudden something happens and they start doing a bunch of things. They start enjoying themselves. They seem to be getting out and more active. Well, see, that's exactly how I found myself in recent years. And quite often we go through our entire lives thinking about, what do we do this for? What is all this truly for? You go to school, you spend, 12 years, maybe another 4 to 10 years, depending if you want to be say an engineer, or you want to be a doctor, it might take another 10 years, or a lawyer. But you go to school for all those years, you go to school for at least, 10 to 20 years of schooling, come out on the other end just to realize 5 years into it, why am I doing this? See, then you start to come to the realization later in life, it goes even further. There's another phase to that. Why am I doing this? And sometimes we have those questions about, what is this all about? What is that meaning of life? And what's the point? See, I've been coming to those realizations, and I think a lot of us do as we sort of hit those, those midlife years, and we talk about midlife crisis. I believe is part of that. It's part of this conversation where we all start to come to these different realizations. But it actually, in my mind, it's a little bit more, it's a little deeper than that. And there was a time, I think back a couple of years ago. I would say many years ago, but it started many years ago and sort of finished a couple of years ago. Working in that corporate game, sitting in my office, listening to the rhetoric that's coming from a meeting and things that are getting spit out, and you question and wonder, what is the point of all of this talk? What does this discussion really even matter in my life when we're all gone? And it's not just about me, because it's part of a bigger conversation. You get tied up into these corporate games and corporate world, and you get indoctrinated, and you're told that you have to believe in this and we have to do that, and performance this and efficiency that, and that seems to be the name of the game. It's always about bottom line. And yes, that's what makes the world go round in a capitalist market. But at some level, you start to come to this realization that, does any of that really matter? I'm simply too old for this, and life's way too short. See, when you come to the realization that life is too short, which I did, where I'm sitting in these meetings, listening to the usual gambit of noise, nonsense, catastrophe, it's just a background noise. And have you ever been, camping and you're in the woods and it's kind of late at night and you hear this sort of, you hear just in the background this drone of mosquitoes? Have you ever had that? You've been out in the woods, maybe out walking around, and you get this noise, this drone. Well, quite often that droning sound is what it feels like very much when you're in that world. You're in that space where it's just all this background noise. And all this noise just seems to keep resonating and keep humming around you. And it doesn't matter where you're going, what you do, try to turn off the lights, but it always keeps droning. This noise just keeps humming around you. But see, ultimately, that's exactly what we're talking about here. You come to the point where life's too short to listen to all this noise. And that's what happens when we're dealing in some of these corporate environments. And I, sit in my office few years back, and I get in there, and it was a struggle some days just to even drag myself into the office, because knowing that it's going to be more rinse, lather, repeat. And it's going to be more noise, more directives, more deliverables, more conversation, discussions. And all of it just ends in the same place. Just another day, rinse, lather, repeat. But then in the midst of all of this, you're watching life go by. And I hate to say this, as you're sailing through life and you're living that journey, and you're so indentured and so enthralled with all the activities at work and your day-to-day grind and the hustle and the push and all of that, you start to realize you're actually desensitizing yourself to the things that really matter. I remember having conversations, my mother, for example, would reach out to me when she was around a few years ago. And she would say, like a relative of ours, she would call me and say, "Hey, Mark, so-and-so, say a cousin, just passed away." And it's just, it hits you, but it doesn't really hit you. Have you ever been in those cases where you're sort of almost zoned out, almost desensitized, almost not necessarily allowing those feelings to enter? It's almost this force field of energy that you have around you. Now, I love my parents and my family, 100%. But anything outside of your immediate family, you start to put this force field around you. And it's a sensitivity force field, I like to see it. Because it's really, there's a lot of going on. And you start developing these shields, these force fields, as it were. When you're working a corporate game, you're working in your day-to-day, you're shielding off problems, issues. You think about your boss comes at you with a bunch of problems, here's some solutions. Your coworkers come with some problems, bang, 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 you're coming up with solutions. You all of a sudden have a problem at home, flat tire, solution. There's always something going on, and most people quite often find themselves throughout their lives trying to find those solutions, trying to solve some problems. And in solving those problems, you kind of create this resilience that basically puts you in a state of mind where you're able to fight off all of those external forces. And that's sort of your defense mechanism. But that also tends to happen, unfortunately, sort of desensitizes you when things that really matter actually hit your radar. Like my mother calling me to tell me that one of our cousins passed or an uncle passed away. And a lot of those things just don't seem to hit you as hard. It's not as impactful because it just seems you've sort of utilized your defense mechanism to isolate from those conversations. And unfortunately, this is just the way we start to sort of adapt to our environment. We start to move on. And all of these things that come at us from left, right, center always put us in a place where we're always put ourselves at a bit of an arm's reach of anything that's sort of emotional, or I hate to say this, meaningful. And this is something many of us deal with. This is our own defense mechanism. How do we put that off? How do we prevent ourselves from getting crushed and hurt and destroyed, mentally, emotionally, even physically in some cases? It's this our adaptation to what's going on around us. But as we get through this, and as I start to find with time and age, now certainly in my 50s, I'm starting to realize this life is too short. Too short what? To do all those things that really, really matter. Those things you've been defending yourself against for so many years. Playing it safe, being conservative. Why? Because you're trying to defend yourself. You're trying to protect yourself. So you're now in a position where, as we age, and you realize that, wait a minute, the job isn't everything. This career isn't everything. My family, my health, those are everything. Resources, the only thing that really matters is time. Don't waste it. Those are the things. So as we start to realize and life goes on, when we say to ourselves, life's too short, right? Life's too short to care about that big deliverable, about the project that your boss, your manager wanted. I mean, we all have to do that. That's part of the game. We have to show up and do that. But at some level, where does enough become too much? And then we have to make a decision. Am I going to keep doing this till I'm 65 or 70? Some people feel that they want to, they like to, it's all part of the game. But if we're being totally honest, in doing that, we're quite often just giving up those little things, those phone calls with our parents, those caring moments, maybe reaching out to that cousin or that uncle or that aunt, maybe even hopefully if you hear that somebody's ill, you reach out. You spend those moments, you spend that time. You take on that special hobby. When somebody says to me, life's too short, I'm going to say to drive boring cars because that's a hobby of mine. So I'd rather drive a fun car, not to the expense or detriment of my finances, of course. It should never really impact that or roll that over. But ultimately, life's too short to not have good people in your life. Life's too short to spend your days working. Life is too short to spend your days working at a toxic work environment. You see, while it's great to work, I love feeling productive, like many of you like feeling productive. The fact is, being around toxic people, skipping out on those conversations with the people that really do matter, sadly get mixed up. And in our midst of trying to defend ourselves and our emotions and our psychology, we find ourselves pushing off not just the toxic people, but the good ones get pushed out in the same time. Now, this is a kind of an odd conversation, but I guess what I'm just going to ask you, at some level, do you have that same thought? Has that ever crossed your mind? Life's too short to what? To not spend time with maybe your best friend, your spouse, your kids. Maybe take your kids out. I mean, I've started to realize in my 50s, and certainly since I've been retired, now I've had this shift. I no longer am distracted by the corporate environment. I'm now more able to sort of refocus and adjust my attention on family, health, well-being, the things that really do matter. And I've now learned to lower my guard down a little bit because I realize I don't need that quite the same defense mechanism because I'm only allowing quality people. Once I learn who those quality people are in my life, I don't need to constantly defend and ward off all of these big problems like you do when you're working in your corporate environment where it's a literal dog-eat-dog world. So the point is, life's too short is really more based around the premise of why are you wasting your life doing things that are meaningless? Life's too short. Spend it in ways you want to enjoy your life with your friends, your family, hobbies. I've been spending a lot more time doing travel, local travel, international travel, more time with the family, reaching out, trying to reignite some friendships from years ago. Life's getting much more engaging these days. And I can't tell you, I've never felt this good in almost forever. I mean, I could think back into my 20s and my teens to a time when I felt like this, but life is much better than it has been for years. You just have to reignite and realign with your thought that life is too short. So what am I going to do about it?